Welcome everyone to session 3 of our masterclass series, The Building Blocks for Truly Touchless Invoice Processing within NetSuite. Before we get into the agenda, I'll just do a quick introduction. My name is Emma Knox and I'm manager of the Solutions Consulting team here at Charted. And then today, presenting with me as well, you guys know Mike. He's been on all of the other masterclass sessions as well, and he is one of our product managers here at Charted. So what we're going to be doing today, our agenda, what it kind of looks like is we're going to run through what does touchless invoice processing actually mean and how the process works. We're going to do a full live demo of zero-click bill creation. And then what we're going to kind of talk through is just how we're going to be finding these specific vendors and situations that can be touchless processing ready. We're also going to be kind of looking into what to do when your touchless rate lags, and then what kind of benchmarks to look for and how to keep improving that percentage. At the end, we'll just do a quick Q&A, and then we'll kind of review what's next. And head to the next slide. All right, the foundations for touchless processing. So before we kind of get into the mechanics of everything, I wanted to just quickly connect the dots across the series that we've had within our masterclass. So session 1, we reviewed the AI invoice processing and what it actually looks like within NetSuite, how the system reads an invoice, how it creates the bill. Session 2, we then kind of covered the AI directions and real life processing scenarios. So within this session and within session 3 today, this is essentially a wrap up, and it's kind of sitting on top of what we've spoken about in the prior sessions. These 4 boxes on this slide are the foundation. So I'm just going to kind of run through the details of what we focused on and what touchless invoice processing sits on. So our industry-leading OCR accuracy. So OCR, your invoices are coming in. OCR is extracting that vendor, getting that invoice number, dates, amounts, custom fields, line level items. It's getting all of that from your invoices. It doesn't really matter kind of what template, what format your invoice is in, as long as it's within that PDF template. We're going to read your invoices if they're multi-language, multi-currency. And what happens when it reads your invoices is we have a natural system learning. So whenever you click save on that vendor bill, when it comes in, that's when our OCR starts to kind of learn what do your vendor invoices look like in the background. And it learns every single time you click save. So as you click save for the first time, the next time you come in, it's maybe learning your GL coding patterns, maybe your department or classes that are chosen on the line level items. Every single time you're clicking save, you're going to have to do less and less manual entry. So that vendor confidence builds with every save that we do. We are, oops, sorry, something just popped up as I was reading. So the flexibility with AI directions, we talked about that in our last session. Our AI directions help handle those edge cases that can pop up. So things that kind of OCR wouldn't know by just reading that specific invoice. For example, I had a client the other day and we were concatenating 2 specific fields that were found on their invoice and pulling it into the line level memo field within their invoice. So that's just kind of an example of what we can do with the flexibility of AI directions. And then obviously everything is within NetSuite. So we're a NetSuite native software. Everything is within NetSuite. You never have to leave or go to a different system. You don't have to worry about data not connecting. Everything is within NetSuite. As soon as the vendor bill is saved, we have that audit trail within there as well. And then there's no connector to manage or maintain. To the next slide. So what is touchless invoice processing? What is it? So these are invoices that move from receipt. So whenever you drag and drop your invoice or you email it into the system, as soon as it comes into the system, the bill is created without zero human interaction. So there's no interaction needed. You guys are probably used to it coming into the system. You're clicking into it. You're seeing it in the split screen view and you're reading it. And then maybe manually making a little bit of updates and changes based on what you see. This touchless invoice processing is essentially removing any of that manual work. So it's coming in and it's creating that bill and putting it into our processing tab within our inbox with zero human interaction. So no one opens it, no one reviews it, and they don't need to edit anything. So there's kind of two ways that we can set this up, which Mike will show. So we can do this for any of your purchase order bills. So any of the bills that have purchase orders associated, this can be enabled at the account level. So within your settings, as soon as a bill comes in, if this is enabled and a PO number is identified, the system will essentially do a match. So it will check if there's any variances between the purchase order and the bill. If it matches exactly, it will then auto create that bill for you. So that's kind of our first option there. The second option is to, for any of your non-purchase order bills, so maybe you have specific bills that you don't create purchase orders for throughout the month, that's totally fine. We can set this up on the vendor level. And these are for specific vendors that have potentially reoccurring charges that come in. And we'll kind of run through what specific vendors this could be the most helpful for. But we can set this up on the vendor level if maybe you don't utilize purchase orders or you have those specific invoices that come in without them. So in both cases, bills that can't be auto-created would just still come into the inbox and be ready for that manual review. All right, we are just going to do a quick Q&A here for you guys. So what percentage of your vendor bills currently process with zero human interaction? So we have a couple options here. So the first one, we don't track this. You guys might even not track this currently. We have less than 10%, 10 to 25%, 25 to 50%, and then we have more than 50%. So we'll give everyone just a quick moment to vote on this poll. Let's see. Okay, so we got about 69% of you guys chose less than 10%, 6% chose 10 to 25%, only 3% of you guys chose more than 50%, and then 22% mentioned that we don't track, or you guys don't track this currently. So honestly, most teams start with we don't track this, or it's on like the lower end of the percentage side. So what we're going to do today is just try to ensure we can get that touchless rate higher for you guys. And then those that did kind of see those higher percentages, we're just going to kind of go through the flow to see if there's any gaps where we could get your percentages even higher. All right, so first, before Mike takes over, what we're going to kind of do is just going to go through how the bills are auto-created and how this can work within your system. So what happens is your invoices are scanned, so they come in via drag and drop or via email. Our OCR reads your invoices, the directions are applied, and what is going on is it's pulling the information into your native NetSuite vendor bill form, the form that you guys already utilize. While it's doing that, it's checking to see if it's matching to a specific purchase order. So if that invoice has a PO listed on it, it's going to try to do the match to that purchase order. Or the other option is it's going to check if that vendor is a vendor that we set up touchless invoice processing on. So that's the first thing it's going to do. If it does find a PO and it matches exactly, there's no variances, or it's one of those vendors that we set up, that bill is then going to get auto-created. So it's going to move, it's going to come into the inbox, and it's going to automatically move into that processing tab within that inbox. Then what's going to happen is when it moves into that processing tab, it's already a bill in NetSuite, it's created, and it's going to automatically submit for approval for you guys. So it's going to trigger your same approval process that you have set up in the background automatically. So it's basically going to come in and automatically go into that approval process. As soon as that bill is through that approval process, so maybe you have 1, 2, 3 steps on there, as soon as that gets approved, it then posts. And then again, within NetSuite, obviously, you know, you have that full audit trail. If you guys utilize our approval process, you have the audit trail of our approvals as well. All right. And then what are some standard use cases? So kind of what we talked about before. Who are the vendors that we can kind of set this up for? So the vendors that I would really focus on are like utility and standard overhead bills. So anything like electricity, gas, water, anything that comes on like a predictable schedule with similar coding every month, that's more likely a vendor that we can set up with touchless invoice processing, along with any of those software subscriptions that you guys have or reoccurring service contracts, anything with consistency over month to month. And you guys will kind of start seeing this as you continue to process vendor bills for your company. You're going to see these similar vendors come in every single month. And that's kind of where you can note, all right, this is a vendor that I could set up for touchless processing. And Mike will go into that process as well with his demo. And then again, just any of those PO backed builds with no variances. So anything that has a PO already created, it's doing that match as it comes in. And if it's that 100% match, that can also be a use case for touchless invoice processing. All right, I'll let Mike take it over here.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks for the intro. So we'll go ahead and jump into a demo environment and look at some of this in action. We'll start by talking about how you can configure some of these settings and figure out if you're using any of the touchless invoice processing or auto creation functionality for PO bills and non-PO bills. Then we'll look at some examples and then we'll follow it through all the way, as Emma talked about in the flow, through approval and through posting to the general ledger. So if you're not familiar with our product, we are a NetSuite native suite app. So our solution runs inside of NetSuite. We think there's a lot of advantages to that because NetSuite stays the single source of truth. We even highlighted that at the beginning of the webinar again, and we've been talking about that very heavily in our series here month over month. So when you log into NetSuite, you can easily navigate into our Suite app through the charted menu here or by using and utilizing this portlet that you can put on your home dashboard. I'm just going to jump into the home page of our Suite app here quickly. One thing I will note, if you are not or if you are a current customer of ours and you're used to our Suite app, you may notice that my demo environment looks a little bit different than your screen might look today. We've been rolling out kind of a new user experience to our customer base, and you have the option to switch into that new user experience. We're rolling that out slowly here. So some of our customers already have this available. You might have this available in your account over the next couple of weeks. So just stay on the lookout for this. You might see this button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen appear. You can go ahead and switch into that new user experience, which has all of the same great functionality that you're used to within our solution, but with just a new kind of more modern look and feel to it. First thing that we're going to go ahead and look at here is how can we turn on touchless invoice processing either for PO bills or non-PO bills, right? Emma walked us through some of the scenarios and how we can create different types of bills. So this is going to require you to be a NetSuite administrator. So you're going to have to work in conjunction with your NetSuite administrator to do this. You can jump into our settings pane here and navigate down to our Invoice AI or invoice automation settings. For PO bills, it's really easy. So you can just come into the PO bills settings here and you can enable this auto create PO bills setting. Like Emma said, when this is enabled, when a bill comes into the system, we see that there's a purchase order already in the system. We saw that purchase order number on the invoice itself. We'll check that this invoice completely matches that particular purchase order. So we'll make sure that there's no variances at all. All of the lines match up exactly. And if all of those checks happen, we'll go ahead and create that bill for you automatically. Now, this is a account specific setting because we do have some very stringent checks like I just talked about. We need to make sure that the PO matches the bill in the PO in the system matches the bill that came in exactly. There can't be any discrepancies in those things before we'll go ahead and create that bill. So we do have this as an overall setting to check all of your bills as they come in and see if we can go ahead and auto create them. The other option that you do have is for non-PO bills. That's on our vendor specific settings. So to get to those, you need to go to the advanced settings menu here. It's going to open up a new page, and then we're going to be able to navigate down to our vendor settings here. On this particular page, you can see I have some vendor specific settings already set up. we're going to focus on this Cascade Power one here. So I'll just go ahead and edit that. You can go ahead and create a new vendor setting if you need to. But on your vendor specific settings, you're going to go ahead and select the vendor that you want to potentially be auto created. And then we have this option over here where you can auto create non-PO bills for that particular vendor. So that's really what the setup kind of looks like for utilizing and enabling the different types of auto creation that we talked about here at the beginning of our demo. So now let's talk about what it looks like when bills actually come into the system. So for that, I'm actually just going to go direct back to the NetSuite homepage here, and I'm going to navigate into our inbox. I have some samples that I'm going to go ahead and pull up here. One of these. Too many windows open on my computer. Apologies about that. Have some samples that we'll go ahead and drag into the system. We did mention that you can continue to email invoices into the system. So we support both email upload and drag and drop upload into the NetSuite inbox. Both of those work with touchless invoice processing. So if you did have a vendor that was emailing you in invoices, that can trigger this touchless invoice processing that I'm about to show you. I am just going to drag and drop a couple files into the system so we can demonstrate how this works. I'm going to drag in one that there's two files here that I'm going to drag into the inbox. One is going to demonstrate a purchase order touchless invoice processing, and the other is going to show a standalone invoice processing example. So we'll see, as you're probably familiar with our solution, those invoices are going to upload and scan in real time. Since I did the drag and drop option, it's going to try to extract the relevant information that it can off of those invoices. It's going to go ahead and still show that to me in the inbox. Vendors, subsidiaries, invoice numbers, PO numbers, all that kind of stuff. It's going to show those to me already. Since it identified those invoices that I uploaded were potentially able to be auto processed, it went ahead and tried to create them for me without me even needing to click into the bill and check that bill out, right? This ties back into what Emma was talking about in the beginning of the system. We define touchless as something can come into the system, it can be created and submitted for approval without you needing to intervene in the process and open up that particular invoice. So that the non-PO bill that I uploaded, it was able to auto create before I could even finish talking about it. So it flowed into the system, found that it was linked with a non-PO bill, was linked with a vendor that I had enabled for touchless invoice processing, and went ahead and created it in the system. So here's what that bill looks like. Let me just go over to the process tab, kind of show you what that would look like in the system here now that it's already created. It went ahead and pre-populated my vendor bill form for me with all of the information that I would have expected. We've talked about in our webinar series already how this is really a culmination of some of the other pieces of technology and features and functionality that we have within our solution. So one of the things I highlighted in our last webinar in this overall series was the idea of AI directions. And we actually walked through this example, how I created an AI direction that was able to pick up the meter number off of this particular invoice. And I wanted to bring that meter number, which is right here, into a custom field. We talked about how I wanted to create an AI direction for the invoice number because I wanted the invoice number to be the meter number plus the month of the invoice plus the year of the invoice, right? So that was an AI direction that I put into place. We also had it go ahead and create a memo for me so that every single time when it receives invoices like this from this particular vendor, it creates the month, the year, and the type of invoice that this is as part of the memo. If you weren't here for that, you can go back and watch the full recording, but I'll just quickly jump into our settings and show you what that AI direction looks like. So here's the example of that AI direction that I put together. It's just really simple, natural language instructions for how I want the invoice number to be set up based on the text that exists on this invoice. I wanted it to go ahead and populate that custom field, which was a meter number field. And this is what I wanted it to do for the memo of the invoice when it was created. So by going in and setting up that AI direction, that unlocked this vendor, at least in my use case here, to be able to be touchless. Because before I was probably having to go make those corrections every single time, but by putting an AI direction in place and realizing that now this vendor is populating the way that I expect month over month, Now I feel comfortable by enabling it with the auto creation functionality. It can flow into the system. It can be automatically created, and I don't need to go back and process this invoice every single time as new invoices are received. And again, you can see that this bill automatically submitted for approval. So if we look at the approval history tab, we can see that it submitted over to an approver. That approver, which is an alias, I guess, of myself, another version of myself in this particular demo account, received an approval email, was able to potentially approve that email. And as far as AP goes, it wasn't their responsibility to even need to look at this invoice, right? They could stay focused on other items within the inbox that maybe needed their additional review, additional time to focus on those other invoices themselves. So let's go ahead and jump back to the inbox here. If I go back to the for review tab, we'll see that that other invoice also finished auto processing. It's already in my process tab. Another thing to highlight is we do show you when bills are auto processed. So there's a separate status to show that this was generated by the system versus generated by a user. You can filter by those statuses. So if you're curious if anything has been auto processed in your system, you can come in and always filter down and see those bills as well. So same thing like the other bill that I just showed you. This flowed into the system. It was matched with a purchase order. So we did a check back to that purchase order. We made sure that all of these lines that were on this invoice, we could accurately determine what lines those should be on the PO. We made sure that the quantities, the rates, and the amounts were an exact match. So again, this is a pretty stringent check before we're going to auto create a PO bill for you because we want to make sure that we got it right. If it doesn't meet those stringent checks, it will stay in the inbox and it can still be processed by a user. But the idea here is we're trying to decrease the quantity of things that your team has to focus on because these are quick wins. These are things that are really easy to get through the system. Let's go ahead and get those through the system so that your team can focus on the stuff that requires a little bit more attention. So it was able to auto create this. It was able to go ahead and submit that for approval. On my approval history tab, we can see that it routed for approval, sent the approver an email. It's ready to continue through the rest of the process. Another thing to know about the PO auto creation functionality that some people ask, people have brought up before, well, what happens if the PO isn't received when we receive the email into the inbox, right? So sometimes the vendor might send you the goods and they also send you the invoice at the same time. You might receive that invoice, but it can't yet be processed if you don't allow the bill to be entered before it's received, before the PO is received. You can't do anything with it. We do have functionality that in the background, it will check for POs that have been received at a later date. If we see that that PO was received, we can try again to auto create it at that later date. So again, just trying to reduce the amount of work that your AP team has to go back, click into multiple items, just following one of these bills through, let's go ahead and take it through approval before we jump back into our PowerPoint. So if you're not familiar with our approval engine, we do have a very robust approval engine that can handle different types of approvals. It can route for different people to approve based on details that might exist on this invoice or how it was coded. So potentially, let's say, because the subsidiary is Charted Inc., and the department is IT, I might want this to be coded to, or this might need to route to a particular IT, manager for approval. We can absolutely do that. We typically think of that as what we could call a matrix-based approval. So there's multiple details on the invoice itself that control where the bill needs to route for approval. That's going to generate an approval email to let the approver know that there is something that they need to approve. That approval email looks like this. This is the one that I just received for, this bill right here in the system. Lets me know that, hey, you need to approve this. It will include information about the bill itself in the body of the email. This can be tailored to your business and your needs as well. So you can add fields, you can remove fields based on what you need. Attachments are going to be included, so the invoice itself is available for the approvers to review. So the idea here is that you still have controls in place. Bills aren't coming in the system being auto approved, being um, able to be paid without visibility, but we're trying to reduce the workload on especially the AP team right here, right? We're trying to get these things out for approval, make sure the people, the business users that need to give their approval can do that. It's still easy for them to do that as well, but you're left focused on the things that need a little bit more of your attention in the process. We can also remind approvers. So if you're not familiar with that functionality, we do have auto approval reminders that can be sent out. So let's say the approver forgets to approve this bill. It's been setting for 3 days or 5 days, however long you want to set up that reminder to trigger again after. They can be reminded to say, hey, this has not yet been approved. Can you go back and please approve this in the system? Once that bill is fully approved, it's going to be in NetSuite already, but it's going to go into an approved status and it's going to post to the GL like we talked about. It's going to be available in all of your NetSuite reports, save searches, and it's going to be available for payment however you want to pay that bill. We do have a payment automation feature as well. Won't dig into that too much here, but we can help with paying your vendors through various methods like ACH and check, make that process a little bit more seamless and easy for you if needed. That's really what I have to talk about here on the demo. We do have a couple more slides which can help just give some practical tips if you have questions about how can this work for me, what should I be looking for, all those kind of things. So let me go back to the deck here and quickly talk about touchless rates, like what you should be seeing, what's good, what maybe is an area to look for improvement, all those kind of things. So first thing to know, and I've kind of highlighted this at the beginning, it's probably not realistic for you to think that every bill inside of the system is going to be auto-created and be able to be processed touchlessly. So I just like to put that out there up front, right? There are bills that are going to be complex. There's going to be instances where you receive bills from new vendors, right? Your AP team still is very valuable in this process. They still have a lot of knowledge that they bring to the table, and we don't want to discount that, right? So we want to acknowledge that there is still a place for human review of a lot of invoices, and we want to make sure that's very clear that that's still necessary on some of your bills. So bills will still flow into the inbox in certain cases. So what's realistic to think about? What should my touchless rate be, and how can I improve that? Typically, for a lot of customers starting out on this journey, we see that between a 5 to 10% touchless rate is pretty typical. I think the survey that we asked at the beginning of the webinar here highlighted that pretty well. I think a lot of people are in that 5 to 10% if you have any sort of measure of where you are or you're not tracking this today. And if you did track this, you'd probably find that you were in that 5 to 10% rank. 25% plus we think is pretty strong. You've done some pretty good system optimization. It doesn't mean you can't go more than that 25% number, but I would say in general, especially depending upon your volume, if you're in that 25% plus touchless rate, you're in a really good spot. You've done a lot to optimize most of the stuff that comes into the system that's very regular and could be auto-created without additional intervention from a human or other people. If you're interested in how you might be able to improve your touchless rate, here's a couple things. And again, this is kind of a little bit of a recap on what we've talked about in this overall webinar series. So the first thing that we've talked about, and this is my recommendation to any of our customers that are kind of starting out, let the system have some time to learn. So don't jump immediately to over optimizing something when you first start out with Invoice AI. It does take some time for certain things to be learned, like the vendors that you might use in your system. We need to learn this is the vendor name on the invoice itself. Invoice AI needs to know what vendor record should be selected inside of NetSuite, right? So there are other things like, hey, maybe invoice numbers are slightly different. We need to learn those things as we've talked about in previous webinars. So give the system some time to learn. As a general rule of thumb, this is not a perfect rule of thumb, but generally I tell people, let Invoice AI see your typical AP cycle. So if a lot of your bills are pretty monthly in cycle, then after about a month of processing bills, you should have a pretty good understanding of the different invoices that you receive from different vendors, and you should see a lot of improvement. Some people's invoice cycle might be shorter, right? You might receive invoices on a weekly basis, right? So it might not take as long. Sometimes you might not receive an invoice, but once every 6 months, right? And Invoice AI, the first time it sees that invoice 6 months later, isn't going to know exactly how to code it because it hasn't seen it yet. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. But in general, let the auto learning run for your typical AP cycle, whatever that may be for your business. And that's going to give you a pretty good baseline of what the auto learning has been able to figure out. After you've gotten to that part of the improvement process, the next thing that you can always look at is AI directions. And this was the entire focus of our last masterclass series. So if you haven't seen that, our last webinar, go back and review that. It'll give you a little bit more insight into AI directions and how these can handle your edge cases. I did talk about one of those on the demo here. So we saw how I had that invoice from a utility vendor. I needed to automate the process of how I wanted the invoice number to be created, the memo to be created, and I wanted that custom piece of information captured. So it's things like that where, hey, a user was doing this before, they were having to key data in off of the invoice. How can I use an AI direction to automate that so that that unlocks that vendor to be able to be processed without human intervention? Other than that, you can just do kind of a general review. Are there vendors that are typically requiring more manual effort? And then from there, there's not a lot of very specific guidance I can have on that one, but talk about it with the business, right? Is there anything you can do? Go back to a vendor, especially if it's a strategic vendor for you and you do a lot of business with them. There might be options for the ability to work with that vendor, right? Can they put information on the invoice for you that would actually help you code the invoice better so that Invoice AI can then pick it up, right? So maybe just look at what the overall state of your AP is. Are there vendors that you would really want to target, and how can we look at automating them and making sure that we can pick up, more information off of the invoice to drive a higher touchless rate? I did want to leave you with a little bit of practical feedback here. This might look like the scariest slide you've ever seen in a webinar, so I do acknowledge that. But there is a way inside of the system, if you're curious, are there bills that have been processed in the last 180 days that Charted has identified? This doesn't mean that they were auto-created. I do want to be clear about that. But there are some ways that we can track a bill had the potential to be auto-created, even if it wasn't auto-created. So I put together this. This is a SQL query, if you're not familiar with that. But this is something that you can run inside of your account, and it will break down the vendors that we've identified that potentially could have had bills to be auto-created. You're not going to be able to see this on the slide, and I don't expect you to type all of this in right now. So we did put this into an article on our knowledge base. So let me go ahead and show you that. If you go to docs.charted.com, this will take you to, oopsies. This will take you to our public knowledge base. If you scroll down to the bottom, you can find our FAQs. Let me just ask it here. You can also use this top bar to find things on the website. How can I identify vendors for auto creation? There it is. So there's this whole page that's been created, step-by-steps of how you can go in, how you can enable a tool that is part of our Suite app itself. It's called the Suite QL Playground. This will allow you to run queries like this that look really scary. So you can go ahead and copy this when you go back into our Suite app. Once you enable the Suite QL Playground, you can go ahead and run this query, and it'll give you a quick summary in the account of vendors that have bills that could potentially have been processed touchlessly. It does it by the total count, and then it breaks it down by whether you were using POs or non-POs with this vendor. So it's just another data point. You can export this to CSV. You can have a conversation with your internal AP team, and this can be a practical starting point for you as you're looking at where are areas of optimization for me. Some of the ones that look higher, right? Those are vendors that right now you might be able to go ahead and turn on for auto creation. Some of the numbers that are really, really low, if they're strategic vendors, maybe you want to look at those a little bit closer and see, are there areas of optimization for those vendors? So take a look at that as a little piece of homework and see if there's any opportunities for making your particular process a little bit more streamlined and smoother. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Emma to wrap up, and then we'll open up for some questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. All right, so some key takeaways. So what we've learned today. So touchless rate is a really important metric. So we saw in our prior sessions that OCR accuracy tells you how well the system reads your actual invoices, but the touchless rate tells you how much time your team actually saves. So this could save you a lot of time, especially defining those specific vendors where someone doesn't need to go in, review the invoice, and save it. Start narrow and expand from confidence. So we don't recommend enabling auto create across your full vendor list all at once. Do what Mike said. So run the query, see what vendors you can capture and what specific vendors could be ready for auto processing. Get those specific vendors in place. And then again, as months go by, as weeks go by, and you see those specific invoices coming in, maybe those reoccurring invoices, add them to your system, add them to your settings, and then go from there. The data to get started is already in NetSuite. So just like I mentioned, that query that Mike put on the screen, you guys will have access to, and you can start running your touchless invoice processing from there. And it should go up every month, right? So as I mentioned before, as the months go by, as the weeks go by, not everything can be auto-created. You most likely don't want everything to be auto-created and you want some eyes on there, but an upward trend is a good measure of success, especially with that touchless invoice processing. Awesome. All right, and then this is very exciting. We actually put together a full ebook. So if you guys scan this QR code, or I believe we just put it in the chat as well, this will review basically everything we went through in our past master classes. It touches on OCR and AI directions and more about touchless invoice processing. It's great to save potentially in your browser for future use, especially if you guys already utilized our software. This is very helpful. So feel free to scan that QR code or click the link that we put in the chat. And you guys will have all that information at your fingertips. And then I believe we are going to open it up for questions. So I believe we got a good amount of questions. Mike, I think you are taking over these.
Yep, I was looking through some of the questions while Emma was wrapping up, so I'll just go ahead and try to address as many of these as we can. We have about 5 minutes left. If I don't get to your question and you didn't submit it anonymously, we'll try to follow up with you later if we can, but let's see how many of these I can get through. So there was a question about whether non-PO vendors need to be set up individually. Yes, that is one of the controls that we do have in place for non-PO vendors. Remember the PO functionality and the checks that we have to make sure we're not auto creating things we shouldn't for the PO side of things is pretty stringent. We want to make sure that we match to the PO, the amounts, the items, the amounts, the quantities, the rates are all exactly like you would expect for the corresponding items. So we have a pretty, sure data source to check inside of NetSuite to make sure that we're not auto creating things that we wouldn't expect. On the vendor side, the control that we built in is we want to make sure that we're only ever auto creating things for vendors that you would expect. So because of that, we do make sure that you go in and say that it's okay to potentially auto create these. Again, we highlighted in the demo, that doesn't mean that you don't have to route those for approval. There can still be approvals after the fact, so there still can be eyes on those non-PO bills, but it was just the control that we decided to put in place to make sure that it wasn't created when it shouldn't be. There was another question about some of the NetSuite standard functionality and kind of comparing our OCR versus maybe any out-of-the-box NetSuite OCR. If you're referring to NetSuite's bill capture functionality, NetSuite does have their own solution for bill capture. Our solution has other features and functionality that you're not going to get with NetSuite's bill capture, things like AI directions, which we've highlighted in this particular webinar, series, things like some of this auto creation functionality that I demonstrated. This is all unique to our solution and not something that you get with NetSuite's out of the box OCR solution. So yes, they are very different. Just kind of sum up that question. You're not going to get the level of functionality and automation that we've built into our solution with anything that NetSuite offers out of the box. We had another question that was about the number of AI directions. So I highlighted in the webinar here how AI directions can be used to potentially take a vendor from not being touchless to touchless. So this opens up the question, what if I need to create a lot of directions? That's okay. In general, like we talked about, directions are scoped by keywords, and you can go back to our last webinar and get a little bit more information about that. Where you will potentially see things slow down in the system is if you have a lot of directions that are going to apply to one particular document, because that is additional context that we have in the scanning process that we're trying to sort through. So if you're familiar with any sort of AI tool that you use today, if you type a really short message into that AI tool, it can typically respond to you pretty quickly. If you type a really long paragraph into the AI tool, it's going to take it longer for it to parse through all of those things. So by limiting things by keywords to making sure we're only sending and using those prompts when we need to use those additional AI directions, you don't typically have, there's not going to be a drop in the scanning speed by creating multiple AI directions. Let's see if there's any other questions that we can address here really quickly. All right. I think that's all we have time for today. Oh, there's one more question I see here that I can answer really quickly. So there's a question about whether bills can be generated and approved through the touchless process, essentially skipping the approval process. That's definitely possible. You can set up our approvals to say, if this was auto-created, go ahead and auto-approve it as well. That is an option. If you wanted to set up steps in your approval process that auto-approve under a certain dollar threshold, you could choose to do that. We did highlight approvals as an additional control in the process. It doesn't mean that you have to have approvals, and you could definitely allow those things to auto-approve if you chose to. All right, I think that's all we're going to have time for today. So appreciate you guys taking the time. If there were any questions I didn't get to because I didn't have time to fully read through and understand the question, we'll try to circle back with you and answer those in follow-up. But we really appreciate you all joining our webinar here today.